Okay, as we have discussed a couple times in class, the fall of Rome creates this power vacuum. Basically, there's nobody in charge. It's absolute chaos. You have these warlords running all over the place with their armies, basically enforcing justice and law and order at the point of a gun. Okay, so they need a new system. As the videos we watched in class and last night show you, Charlemagne comes up with a new plan, and it's called feudalism. Feudalism is the political system that takes over out of this chaos. Okay. Early on in the Middle Ages, right after Rome, the local kings are just too weak to keep the invaders out of their kingdoms. People leave the towns and cities that they live in, and they get together in the countryside for protection and survival. And often they congregate around an armed group. Some of them maybe has a castle, someplace that you can defend. Okay. These people are all live in well-defined social classes. Everybody knows their role. Everybody knows their place. You're pretty much very similar to the caste system of India. You're born into a level of society and you stay there. Okay, so these three systems or castes are these. Nobility, that's the kings and queens. The greater lords, the large landowners, the lesser lords, the small landowners, and the knights, who are the soldiers of the kings, the lesser and greater lords. Okay. They control the land and they control the power. Under feudalism and under its economic system and manorialism, land means power, land means wealth. The other part of the classes are the peasants. They make up the bulk of the population. They work the land and they serve the nobles, often as foot soldiers. And then you add a third group, which are the clergy. These are the priests. These are the representatives of the Catholic Church. Monks, nuns, okay. They dominate life. They are the most powerful and highly respected people of this time frame. Often they're the only people that know how to read, and they are the keepers of not only knowledge, but they can also tell you that you are going to heaven or not. So they are very, very powerful. Okay, simple hierarchy. We've seen these before. Middle Ages was kind of a two-style one. You had at the very top of it, you had the Pope, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, and all the church people. And the church people, the priests, all the way up to the bishops and cardinals, they all have a lot of power. And they often have power over the monarchy because oftentimes the monarch's power to rule comes from the church. The church crowns a lot of the kings. So the monarch and his family are on top. So that's the king or the emperor. Then you have the nobles, people with large estates, very powerful. They have armies. And then there's two groups that are kind of underneath the nobles, or maybe they're lesser nobles. You have the vassals, who are the people that have smaller chunks of land, and they often owe their service or loyalty to one of those higher nobles. They may run a piece of the land for one of the great noblemen. And then the knights, who are their soldiers for both the vassals and the nobles. Then you have kind of a working class or a merchant class made up of merchants, farmers, people who own their own land, and craftsmen, blacksmiths, barrel makers, wheel makers, all those people. And then on the bottoms you have peasants, who we're familiar with. These are the people that work the land. And then we have a new class of people that you may not be familiar with called serfs. And serfs are similar to slaves, but not. It's not slavery. It's slavery, but it's not slavery. It's very kind of confusing to talk about. We'll get into it in some detail in a few minutes. Okay. So feudalism develops, as I said, in response to the fall of Rome, reaches its height from the 8th to 11th century, so roughly 700 to 1000 AD. It's a system of local rule and defense that replaces the centralized government of Rome and the large army. Self-sufficiency, being able to take care of everything on site, replaces the independent economy of Rome, which had trade and goods coming from all over the place. Now you pretty much, if you can't make it at home, you don't get it. Okay. Feudalism is this what they call this system. It's very loosely structured, in which powerful nobles own large section of land that they divide up into estates called fiefs. Okay, think about where we are here in South O. Okay, this is, say it's a large landowner. It runs from Route 173 Seneca Turnpike up at the top of Onondaga Hill all the way down to Route 20. Okay, and it goes from Nedro over to Marcellus. Okay, and you are a large landowner, you own all this land, you divide it up. You got one guy who lives out in Atisco, and he kind of runs that area. He's got a fort there that keeps people off the land and takes care of the locals. Got another one in Navarino, another one here in South O. Maybe you got another one in Nedro, one in Marcellus, one up on Onondaga Hill. All these guys pledge loyalty to you, the large landowner. They also have soldiers that they will pledge to defend the land and to be kind of a private army for the large landowner. Okay, the local lord has absolute power over the people living on his land. He is the lawmaker, he's the tax collector, he's the judge, he's the general of the army, and he usually has his own personal army. We will get into this whole arrangement in class tomorrow. Okay, class structure, as I said, is very rigid. It's determined by your birth, not by your ability. Very seldom does anybody rise beyond their birthright. Okay, because it's a warlike climate, there's all these invasions going on. Many of the wealthy train to become knights, mounted warriors, and they live by a strict code of discipline, both learning how to ride well and handle their weapons, but they also have a code of honor known as chivalry that binds their code of conduct. We will look at that in some detail in class. Okay, women play an important role because they manage the estate, especially when the husband is off at battle. And girls of noblemen are trained to take over that role when they have their own household. Okay, women do have some inheritance rights, but most of the possessions go to the eldest son, but he is expected to take care of his mother if the father dies. Okay, and then finally you have the peasants. These are the farmers. These are people who work the land. In return for that, they get protection from the local lord. They are obliged to perform services for the local lord. They usually have to take care of his land at least 3 days a week. They have to maintain the council, and then they have to pay fees to use the lord's mill, the lord's bakery, and any other service he provides, the blacksmith shop and all that stuff. And in return for that, they get protection. Okay, this system of feudalism is the political side. That's how the government works. The economic system is based on the same ideas, but it's called Manorialism. Okay, and it's the economic system structured around the Lord's Manor. Again, that huge tract of land that we're talking about that we just described down here in South O. Okay, and it usually was more in one village and all the fields surrounding it. Okay. And everybody has certain rights and responsibilities under that. It developed by the Germanic people because that's who the Franks were. Charlemagne's people, they were actually Germans. They were not French. Later on, they become the French. And you have to remember that land is the source of wealth, not money, not trade, not commerce. Okay? So here's kind of in a nutshell, basic social, political, and economic unit of feudalism. Manor provides all the needs of the community. People didn't leave because, first of all, it wasn't safe. Second of all, they didn't need to go anywhere. Okay? Self-sufficient. Everything you had was there. Usually contained a castle, the fortress where the Lord lives, usually made of stone. You can make the picture. Always has a church, and it's always a Roman Catholic church. It could have a blacksmith. It had a bakery because bread was the staple of life. Had a mill to make the flour. Okay, so you could make the bread. And then you've got the farms and pastures around it where you grow the grain to turn into bread. You also raise livestock like sheep and cattle and other animals and the Lord's horses to mount his knights on and all that good stuff. Okay, so a little bit of a couple pictures here. You can see a medieval castle. On the left is kind of a map of an individual manor. You can see all the different things that are in that manor. The fields are divided up usually into three pieces. You have the Lord's fields, the peasants' fields, and then you had a field for the church. They operated what's called the three-field system, where they would cultivate 2 fields during a year and leave another to lie fallow so it could re-energize. Okay, very few things came from outside the manor, but they were necessities. Salt, used for preserving goods, but also flavoring food. Iron, to make not only tools, but also weapons. And then stones to build the castles, to build walls, and all that stuff. If you didn't have these on your manor, then you had to get them from someplace else. Okay. Finally, most of the peasants who live on the estates are serfs. Okay. They're not enslaved, but they're bound to the land. Okay. They're basically considered a piece of property to some extent, but not the way a slave is. Okay, it's not someone that gets all the abuse and everything of that. You just are someone the Lord owns you, kind of. You're part of the land. Okay, that's the way it's always been explained to me. The search for part of the land. They do the work for the Lord on His land, and other work such as repairing roads, fences. In return for this, they get several acres of their own to farm, and they could farm it when they were done working on the Lord's. Life is very difficult for this class of people. They work long hours. Few of them live past 35. But in spite of this, they're held together by the common thread of Christianity. And I've already talked about this a little bit. Everything in these people's lives revolved around the church. Marriage, birth, death, and holidays, all centered around the church. Okay? It was life and death, and this whole idea of life was bad, so the appeal of the afterlife is very critical. Finally, everything is tied together by the feudal contract, which is an oath of loyalty, which is a binding agreement in the feudal system. Everybody abides by it, and they have to live by it. That's it for now. We're going to talk about feudalism in some detail tomorrow in class, and then we will move on. Thanks much.